So the radio drama that I'll be producing is called Studio 4. Cool. So my original inspiration, and something which I'm taking quite a lot from in terms of how it's structured per episode, is the web podcast called Welcome to Night Vale. It's purely an online thing. You can subscribe to SoundCloud and a podcast app on the App Store whilst taking it through a podcast service called Commonplace Books. And what that follows is it follows a group of characters all tied together by a newsreader, and it comes in the form of a local news bulletin in kind of a weird and wacky made-up place called Night Vale, which is apparently in America. So I'll be using this to structure my drama, and by taking a couple ideas which has brought it to more like commercial success over the years. A further inspiration was my interest in underground music and my experiences in production for rising artists. So, the setup is it follows the life of 3 newly graduated media students, and as I've seen, it's quite hard to get a job in the media industry nowadays. There's quite a lot of jobs being snapped up quite quickly. So in order to survive and make some money, they have to take up jobs as underpaid actors on a Archer's rip-off called Country Living. And it's about following your dreams in the face of adversity and against different challenges and rising above hard times in your life. So the format that this is in is it's an interesting structure, as it is a radio drama about producing a radio drama. And it follows these 3 students as they take up this job on this rip-off show, and follows them as they work their way through the problems of being on this really bad show to turning the radio station into a more productive and a much more popular radio station as the narrative goes on. Cool, so my characters are Archie. He is the leader of the pack of 3. He graduated highly in his class, and even though he can be quite grumpy, he just wants the best for his friends, and he fears that if he doesn't lead them correctly, that he will let them down. He's the one that first guides them to this job on the radio station, and he's the first one who convinces them that they should stay together in order to survive. This is Eve. She's an ex-Hollywood producer who was kicked out of her position in America for copyright infringement, and has taken all of the money she's produced and put it into solely financing this radio station. Unaware that a program like The Archers actually exists, she believes that she is a pioneer of radio dramas, and believes that she can make a lot of money out of her show, which all the other characters know is an absolute rip-off. This is James. He's Archie's best friend and also his roommate, and he sleeps on his couch at his flat. James made his way through the media course at university by editing his face onto famous movie scenes. And he coasted his way through as his parents wanted him to go into dental surplus management, but realised that was not the career for him. He picked media, as it was the same subject his best friend was doing, and that's kind of piloted his life. Cool, and finally this is Matilda. She doesn't really care that much for the media industry, but got too invested into her course in order to change. She can be quite fickle and can often be quite problematic in the group, but knows how to produce results out of nothing. So she can take the harder situations and turn it into something good. And this is Susie. She lives above the radio station and is also the loyal sound engineer to the radio station itself. As I'll explain later, the radio station went through some hard times, but Susie remained always. And whenever she found out that Eve was buying out the station, she showed up every day to beg for a job back as a sound engineer. Cool. So audience interpretation. The images that I've just shown you, those aren't exactly what I perceive the characters as. In my radio drama, I'll not be including any information to suggest what the characters actually look like. As in Welcome to Night Vale, that you never find out anything about any of the characters. It's left entirely to the audience's imagination. And this has led to people producing fan art and writing different books and spin-offs describing how they feel that the characters look and how the universe around them actually looks. I'll never explicitly say where the show actually takes place. I said it takes place in a city in the UK, but where that is I'll leave unknown. So it means that from the sounds that I use to create the environments, the audience can decide for themselves where they think it takes place. Not only does this create a more engaging atmosphere for the audience, it encourages them to talk about it amongst themselves and spread the word of the radio drama on across various social medias and in person, which can increase the viewer and listener count. Cool. So some of the locations are the cafe. This is where all of the media students came to Paul All-Nights University. It is where they come to discuss the problems they're having with the radio show, and it is a place that they often visit. Archie's flat is directly above, and he constantly abuses the cafe's free Wi-Fi policy. This is Archie's flat. It's quite minimalistic in its way. He doesn't have much stuff as he's not particularly rich. The only thing that he really keeps in his flat is his best friend and roommate James, who sleeps on a pull-out couch. This is Susie's flat, directly above the studio. She comes here straight from work, and it's often a very noisy and chaotic environment. She likes to play her music very loud. You can always hear the whir of a computer or the buzz of an unplugged audio cable. She likes to stay in the studio as long as possible. She likes the environment of the creaky floorboards and the more rustic but charming appeal of the studio. This is an idea of the actual radio studio itself. It's quite old and dilapidated. It's not particularly the most silent place in the world. There's trailing cables all over the place and creaky floorboards and quite old, underused soundboards, and it was a long time since a radio station shut down. Whenever it actually began, it was a frenzied hub of information and entertainment for all ages. It was a good place to discover new music and a good way for families to come together and enjoy the radio all as one unit. But it was discovered that musical artists were laundering money through the station, so the fine that incurred shut down the station altogether. Susie's parents worked at the stations as radio engineers and producers, and in an emergency when Susie was younger, she was allowed to run her own show and was then given a job. Since she was fired from her job and the radio station shut down, she's continued to live above the studio, and when she found out that he was buying it out, she begged for her job back and has since taken up her position as the sound engineer. So, a budget is a low budget due to a naturalistic style. And I've decided to use a naturalistic style as it's a lot easier to produce. I researched into different genres like science fiction made by companies like Final Rune, and I found that it's a lot more difficult to create an immersive atmosphere in a non-naturalistic environment. So when listening to the Archers, I found that all they particularly needed was like wind noises and the sound of birds singing and like footsteps walking on cobbled ground. And I found that these sounds can be very easily produced or taken off websites like freesound.org, and you have a much wider library of sounds to create an immersive atmosphere for the audience. And as I'm not adding in any explicit visual information, it's important that I have an incredibly immersive atmosphere for the audience. And because it's a naturalistic style, it means that quite a lot of these sounds are freely available, which cuts down the cost of having to produce our own. And even if we did want to produce our own, if we wanted the sounds of a cafe, for example, we could record in a cafe. Actors and studio rentals, they make up the bulk of the costs. From doing research online, I found that the total cost of hiring 5 actors in a studio would cost about £1,000 per episode, and income can be generated from the show in a different way. So I decided that the best place to broadcast it would be BBC Radio 6 Music. I originally thought it would be Radio 1, but they are explicitly music and they have a much younger target audience. But from doing research and the fact that I listen to 6 Music myself, I know that they allow interviews and longer information pieces about various musical topics, and as my radio drama is centred a lot around underground music and hip-hop, I figured it would be quite appropriate to broadcast it here. And also, BBC 6 Music covers a really wide target audience, from kind of younger people, like 16, 18, 19, up to about like middle-aged, like 40s and upwards. It encompasses a large body of people. So I feel in this way we could put the radio drama out to a much wider group of people. Cool. So the music aspect. At the end of Welcome to Night Vale, they have a section called The News, in which they play a new and rising artist to close the show every single week. How this fits into the narrative is that the show moves away from producing the rip-off Archer show Country Living when Susie accidentally plays some of her music over the station speakers and it is broadcast out late at night. Whenever the cast come back the next day and look at what's happened, they find that the viewer count spiked overnight as Susie played her music accidentally. It is then that they decide, quite reluctantly from Eve, to rework the station into a hub for underground music, which then increases their popularity and actually makes them quite famous as far as radio stations go. It then follows their journey through the ups and downs of fame and the problems caused by running a successful radio station, mostly in the form of hassle from record labels and other stations wanting them off their turf. So I figured that I could use that idea from Night Vale of using a new artist to close the show each week. In the actual narrative itself, like in the structure of it all, you don't actually hear any of the radio shows, but the end of the radio drama, the end of the episode each week, is the beginning of a new radio show within the narrative. So in order to signify that it's the start of a new show, we would have the characters introduce the show and then play one of these new artists. And in this way, we can generate a small amount of income from record labels paying the show in order to put their new artists on, for example. Okay, so in order to close my slideshow, I will be doing a small bit of audio work, and I made in Ignite a couple of different environments, including the main environment of the radio station and the cafe. So this is the early world cafe where the students came during the university years to pull all-nighters, and where they go to discuss the issues caused by the show and when they come to collect them. And the second main location, and to a lesser extent the third one, is the studio in Susie's flat. Cool. So do you have any questions?
Okay. What would you say the demographic of your target audience is?
My target audience would be from about 18-year-olds to ultimately around late 20s. I feel that would be the main appeal of it. That would appeal to the most, I think.
Yeah. So in your opening 30 seconds then, how are you going to set the scene with regards to sounds and oral signposting?
In the opening 30 seconds of the 5-minute section, I'll briefly discuss how the characters graduate. So by doing this, I will have sounds of various applauses and the name of the main character, Archie, being called up to collect his graduate. I will then fade this away with a delay effect into them sitting in the studio recording an episode of Country Living.
Okay. And who are your actors going to be and why?
My actors are going to be Isaac Opandonker playing James, Faith Adikby playing Susie, Ali Colhoun playing Matilda, and myself playing Archie. I've chosen these people because I like hearing sounds. I have a big audio is a big thing for me, and I thought about who the characters actually are, and then I figured what their voices would be like. So I've picked these people purely on how their voices fit the image in my head. And I didn't want to pick a particularly distinctive voice, as I think that would lead the character to visualise them in only one particular way. So I wanted to pick voices that were quite open-ended and quite sort of normal in a way, so without like the sound of like someone who smokes, like the grating tone of their voice. So it means that there would be no blocks in the audience coming up with their own ideas of what the characters look like.
And you said that it cost £1,000 per episode. How many episodes would you look to have for?
I would look to make about 20 episodes. I thought to myself that this could be a continually running on narrative, but so the chance to make just endless episodes. But I figured that the way that I've written it so far, if it was to continue going on and on, that it would lose interest, that you would eventually run out of ideas that you can go. Because once it gets to this more like affluent radio station making all this underground music, there's only so many scenarios they can face before it has to come to an end. So ideally I'd make about 20 episodes.
Okay, that's all then.
Cool.